Data-driven Fed, are you listening? The Fed is probably making a mistake. I say probably because I have to from a compliance point of view, but I really do believe the Fed is making a mistake. Chairman Powell really does think he is the reincarnation of Chairman Volcker. Financial system implosion. I question the premise of those who say, oh, this is so different. It's such a low base. That's the whole point. It's a low base. 13 times. So there you go, Fed.
In this video, Cathie Wood is mad. Real fucking mad. So mad, she's unleashed on the Fed with a warning of impending disaster. Cathie Wood's message is simple. Wake the fuck up, you fucking morons. You're going to blow everything up. Please listen to me before it's too late. The question is, are they listening? I have never seen Cathie Wood so fired up. It's almost as if she's been taking lessons from the SMR School of Savagery. You saw the intro. That ain't the Cathie Wood we're used to seeing. This is serious business. Pay close attention. And before we get into it, if you want to instantly unlock over 100 exclusive videos plus my 10-year Tesla stock price targets and loads of other perks, including optional access to my Tesla valuation model, join our growing community of thousands of supporters on Patreon with the link in the pinned comment. You can also pick up some Tesla, Elon, and investment themed merch in the merch store. I'll add a few comments along the way, but as we watch these highlights, I urge everyone, please pay very close attention to the words and the body language, the nervous breaths, the nervous chuckles, Cathie delicately trying to choose the right words in terms of compliance while still getting her message across. This situation has pushed Cathie Wood into new territory, right up to the edge. As they say, desperate times call for desperate measures. You've never seen Cathie Wood like this before. That is something to consider.
I'd like to build the case a little more here that the Fed is probably making a mistake. I say probably because I have to from a compliance point of view, but I really do believe the Fed is making a mistake.
Notice that? Cathie Wood, for compliance sake, Fed is probably making a mistake and immediately slams the fucking hammer down and goes, but actually no, they're making a fucking mistake. I just can't say they're making a fucking mistake because of compliance, but they are making a fucking mistake, followed by a huge nervous breath. This is bold from Cathie. I do encourage everybody, if you really want to soak this up, rewind, watch those clips again, pay close attention, maybe even in slow-mo. You'll notice a lot in Cathie's body language. What's not said as much as what is.
And reflecting a little bit more on the Jackson Hole speech that Chairman Powell gave in late August, we've come to recognize that Chairman Powell really does think he is the reincarnation of Chairman Volcker.
Now, in the interest of brevity, I'm not going to go into the background, who all these folks are. Please do your own digging. Cathie Wood has a great point. Of course, there is a link in the description to the full original video, the latest in the know from Cathie Wood. If I explain everything along the way, this video is going to be about 3 hours long. But even without a huge amount of context, I think you guys and girls will get the message.
That we need him to take a sledgehammer to inflation, much like Volcker did. And history has treated Chairman Volcker very kindly. He did turn the tide on inflation. Now, what he did, though, was he turned a tide that had been building for 15 years. It started in 1964 with the Vietnam War and with the Great Society. So many social programs started at that time under President Johnson. And for 15 years, fiscal and monetary policy pretty much went rogue as we look at history. Even after shocks to the system, like the oil embargo, the stimulus that came about because of it, both monetary and fiscal policy, we never saw the kind of slowdown in monetary and fiscal policy that we're seeing right now. Federal spending is still down 14% on a year-over-year basis. You never saw a decline in fiscal policy spending in the 70s. Monetary policy seemed to be on automatic pilot back then. The dollar was getting crushed toward the end of the 70s, adding to the inflationary fire. And so Chairman Volcker did choke off money supply and killed inflation. It took a long time for people to believe that inflation had peaked. In fact, I don't think Many people believe it peaked, as it did in 1981, until 1986 when oil prices crashed. So the inflation expectations were embedded in the system, and it was very difficult, and Volcker did a masterful job. So that was over a 15-year period that inflation had built. By the time the Fed got around to tackling it this time, it was not a 15-year problem. It was a 15-month problem.
This is ultra important. Please make sure you understand what Cathie has just said and what she's about to say.
And from our point of view, it was caused primarily by shocks, major shocks to the system that we had never seen before. We had not had, since Spanish influenza, a global pandemic. And we did not have the supply chain problems, 2 years worth of them, that we had because of the COVID panic. And then, of course, we had another shock to top those off, and that was Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So these are shocks to the system. This was not a period of embedding inflation expectations. And yet, Chairman Powell is taking a sledgehammer that is actually bigger, much bigger. It's at least 6 times bigger right now, and could be 8 to 10 times bigger if the Fed does raise the Fed funds rate another 75 basis points.
I 1,000,000,000% agree with Cathie Wood here. The inflation we are currently seeing is not a result of the usual suspects. It's a result of the insane fascist shutdowns during the plague and the domino effect we're still seeing from that today. Huge logistics challenges, people can't get parts. Remember that whole thing where Elon said if you don't make stuff, there's no stuff? And now the cost of stuff has gone to the fucking moon? I wonder why that happened. Geez, I don't know. Geez, no one could have seen that coming. Not. Essentially what Cathie is saying here is that the fuckwits at the Fed are trying to treat the symptoms of anorexia by going on a diet.
Oh, inflation. Oh, we know how to fix inflation. We've seen people do that before. Let's copy exactly what they did. Don't worry about the cause of inflation if it's not the same thing.
This boggles the mind. I've been having conversations in private discussing this. I'm stunned to be seeing interest rates moving up at all. Let me ask a question. Let's just say that ratcheting up interest rates is how you fight inflation, because according to the Fed, that's exactly what you do. Can I ask a question here? How is destroying the housing market, having people defaulting on mortgages, house prices collapsing by double-digit percentages, how is that addressing the supply chain bottlenecks and the domino effect from the fascist shutdowns 2 years ago? It's not. I'm no economist, and I can see this. I've been discussing this stuff in private with friends and family for months, going, what the fuck are they doing? Cathie gets it, I get it. What the fuck is the Fed doing? What are they thinking? No, wait, they're not thinking, because thinking hurts. This is why there's so much urgency and emotion in Cathie's voice. She sees what's happening. This is worse than a legacy automotive manufacturer headed directly towards an iceberg, completely unaware that they're about to go bankrupt because of EVs and moving too slow. This is a slow motion train wreck in action. Curiously, the vast majority of the smart people that I personally talk to, know, and listen to have begun saying the exact same thing. Hey Fed, what the f*** are you doing? This is not going to end well. It's like they live in a bubble. I mean, seriously, Cathie's right. This is a fucking disaster. There will be a massive 180 as soon as these morons realize what they've done. But we can see what they're doing now. They don't realize it. It's like they've jumped out of a plane without a parachute and haven't realized they're going to go splat. It's madness. And then, of course, the final blow, the war in Ukraine. Another shock to the system, not a typical cause of inflation.
And what do I mean by that? Well, Chairman Volcker was dealing with double-digit interest rates. He took interest rates from 10% to 20%. Now, by the time he did that, consumers and businesses had gotten used to maneuvering around inflation. So while that sounds shocking, going from 10 to 20%, and it did have some shock value, it wasn't the same as what we're experiencing today with Chairman Powell and the Fed. Today, we've gone from 0.25% on the Fed funds rate to 3.25, which is a 13-fold increase, not a 2-fold increase.
This is a critically important point. Again, something I've been discussing privately. In fact, I was arrogant enough to tell people recently, low interest rates were here to stay. For a long fucking time, the reasoning was pretty simple. Going from 8.25% to 8.5% is a tiny increase in relative interest rates, a tiny increase in relative repayments on debt. It's nothing. But going from 0 to 0.25%, or from 0.25% to 0.5%, it's a doubling. If you double interest rates, you're going to have a bit of an impact. If you quadruple them, you're going to have an even bigger impact. Cathie Wood now is talking about a 13 times increase in interest rates. This defies belief. Think about all the people who will be defaulting on mortgages, who'll have their homes seized, end up on the streets, the businesses that will collapse because they can't afford the repayments on their debt, the construction companies in particular going belly up left, right and centre. First, they're not able to build for your protection. Next minute, they can't afford their interest repayments. In Australia in particular, construction companies going bankrupt left, right and centre, and this is before the most recent rate increases. The Fed is literally trying to destroy the US and potentially global economy. The US is such a large economy in and of itself that anything the Fed does within the United States will affect other countries as well. And then of course there's the whole,
Oh, what are they doing? Oh, we'll just copy them.
shout out to the morons at the Reserve Bank of Australia, literally following after the Fed like a bunch of fucking idiots.
Now, many people, I was interviewed by someone the other day and said, oh yeah, but that was such a low base. There's no comparison. In fact, that makes this even more dramatic. That's what's so interesting. People dismiss this way of thinking about it, saying, oh yeah, but the base was so low. The base was so low, and it had been really since 2008 and 9, because we were in a terrible crisis then, and it took a long time to get out of it. And so we did not have inflation expectations built into the system. I really don't believe at all. And yet Chairman Powell is behaving as though what's going on today with inflation is much worse than what Volcker inherited. Starting from a low base is really shocking the system, especially given how long interest rates have been low. So I question the premise of those who say, oh, this is so different. It's such a low base. That's the whole point. It's a low base, 13 times.
Cathie's pissed. I mean, pissed off. Watch that again in a sec, but I just want to add a few things. First, notice she's referring to discussing this with some of the morons in the mainstream finance media who are super dismissive. Wouldn't be the first time they didn't get what's going on. Let's watch again in detail. Cathie's response here. It's so telling. She's barely able to contain herself.
I question the premise of those who say, oh, this is so different. It's such a low base. That's the whole point. It's a low base, 13 times.
She mad. She frustrated. She pissed.
So if they raise the Fed funds rate another 75 basis points, this will be a 16-fold increase compared to Volcker's 2-fold increase. Now, we have been expecting serious ramifications, financial and other ramifications, because of this monetary policy. And we've gotten the first one. But most people here in the United States are not aware of it or haven't thought very carefully about it because it doesn't seem to matter to us. But I was in the UK around the time that it had its near Lehman moment. Near Lehman moment means the financial system implosion. And that was just about 10 days ago.
Did you guys catch the nervous laugh there? Cathie looks very uncomfortable.
Financial system implosion. Now, what do we mean by that? Well, there is something called LDI, liability-driven investing, and it's where pension funds match their liabilities with assets. So they will, in its pure form, they will match one for one the amount that they have to pay out to pensioners as they retire. Now, it would be great if they did match assets with liabilities completely from a safety to the system point of view. But they don't. And with banks, and a very low interest rate environment, they got used to using derivatives and taking shortcuts to try and accomplish the same goal. And after a very long period of very low interest rates, I heard someone say the other day, and we were talking about this LDI crisis in the UK, that the reason it's so serious is pension fund sponsors were beginning to think, and banks were beginning to think, that interest rates would stay very low for a very long time, for as far as the eye could see. And that assumption was built into the kind of derivative activity they were doing. No one expected a sharp increase in interest rates. Well, once that happened, pensions began getting margin calls, and they couldn't meet them. And in fact, if interest rates had gone to 8%, and I think they got to 6% over there, if they got to 8%, then according to some of the people close to that situation, whom we have consulted, then the pension system would have collapsed. But it wouldn't really have been the pension system. What really would have collapsed if the pension funds were not meeting those margin calls were the banks, the counterparties in this case for these derivatives.
So, according to Cathie's sources, banks in the UK were this close to collapsing a week ago. Nothing to see here. Move along.
And so we think this is a bit of a financial crisis, and we think we'll see it elsewhere as the Fed continues to raise interest rates, as it seems want to do. Certainly this week was full of speeches from all the Fed members reminding everyone that they're going to take interest rates up until we get to 2% inflation. Well, so we'll see what happens on October 14th. By that time, I think they will have been deleveraged and will be past the maximum pressure associated with this guilt trip, which is why we called this in the series guilt trip. We're seeing other changes. We've seen China intervene to limit the weakening of the yuan. We've seen Japan doing the same. Now, what is that? What are they doing when they do that? Well, when Japan is trying to support its currency at 145 yen to the dollar, what it does is it sells dollars and buys back yen. Now, that's good in a way. It's doing some of what the Fed should be doing here, actually. It's providing dollar liquidity to the rest of the world. China is doing the same thing. And so we'll see what happens from here. I think this is getting to be so serious that we are reaching a cathartic moment. The Fed has acknowledged that there are international ramifications to what it is doing, but it is thinking first and foremost about the U.S. What are some of the weak links that we're seeing? We've been worrying about auto credit for a while now, and now we have more reason to. Yesterday, we got the Manheim used car index. It's a value index, pricing effectively. And it dropped another 3% plus. It was 4% plus decline last month. And so what we have now is it has the year over year increase has gone from 54% in April of 21 to minus 0.1. So there you go, Fed. There's some indication that there's another indication that deflation is in the system.
You guys caught that, right? So there you go, Fed. Again, the body language. Cathie coming in aggressively, moving forward. Listen, you fucking idiots. Hello, wake up. But I think they're still sound asleep.
So there you go, Fed. There's some indication that there's another indication that deflation is in the system. That index peaked in January and is now down 14% just since January. So it's declining at more than a 20% rate. Now, why is this important? Well, a lot of auto paper out there makes assumptions, or the investors make assumptions about the residual values of cars. And those residual values have been going up, maybe not as much as the used car index, but they have been firm. If we're right, the used car price index is going to collapse here.
Collapse. Her words, not mine, although I have spoken about this very issue, in fact, many years ago on this very channel. Collapse is the word. There is an impending disaster in the automotive industry, in particular, automotive finance. All of these loans secured against assets, internal combustion engine vehicles, whose value is about to fall off a fucking cliff. Don't say I didn't warn you. This will be brutal. What Cathie's talking about is a temporary massive increase in used vehicle prices, and now we're beginning to see a collapse. We'll see an even larger version of this same scenario playing out as ICE vehicle values collapse, not because there's a little bit more supply, not because of the fascist shutdowns causing huge supply chain issues and shortages, but because consumers realize that owning an ICE vehicle would require brain damage. EV price parity is just around the corner and they're already way cheaper to own and operate. The value of ICE vehicles is going to plunge off a cliff in the coming months and years, and we're currently being treated to a small preview of the carnage to come. The supply chain shocks giving us an insight into what's just around the corner.
Why? Well, many people bought cars during COVID because they wanted to avoid mass transit. Under normal conditions, they didn't need that car. Nonetheless, they were quite happy to see used car prices going up, with the thought that when the coast is clear, they would sell back into the market, into the used car market. And as I mentioned, used car prices were up 54% on a year-over-year basis at one point. Now they're flat to down. And now dealers who were paying too much for used cars are sitting on losses, and they are going to have to disgorge those inventories. Because inventories cost money to carry, especially as interest rates are going up. So they're going to be forced to sell. And we believe that's already happening. And there's about $1 trillion of auto paper. Now, this won't be a systemic risk. But because auto paper was the best performing paper during 08-09, this is going to be quite a surprise to a number of investors. If the Fed were data driven, it would be paying attention to employment in the ISM index for September. I would also imagine that they would consider leading indicators, which in every recession and recovery, in my experience, the Fed has paid a lot of mind to. The Fed may be saying that it's data dependent, but it's looking at the data it wants to look at. It's not looking at the totality here. So let's go to the commodity prices. Again, data-driven Fed. Are you listening?
No, Cathie, they're not listening at all. Now, guys, I'm not here to stir up drama. I don't want to be that guy.
Oh, panic about this. Click my video. I want you to be worried so you watch my video.
But this really does need to be discussed and covered in detail. The Fed is making a colossal error of judgment. What's worse is that this error has been obvious for months, yet they're still moving in the same catastrophic direction. This is why Cathie Wood is on the brink of losing her fucking mind. Her emotions are starting to come out. She cannot contain herself. This is pent up frustration that these morons are not looking at the data. I don't know what to do. How do we get them the message? This will not age well. We're seeing the Fed do their best to destroy the US economy, cause countless bankruptcies and foreclosures, destroy the housing market, and the knock-on effects will be felt globally. This is a catastrophic error of judgment that the Fed continues to compound and compound and compound. I can't believe what I'm seeing happen. Clearly, nor can Cathie Wood. I don't know what to do. Just need to put this on the record. This is a disaster. It's a catastrophe of colossal magnitude. At some point, the sooner the better, we will see a massive, complete and utter 180, an urgent reverse course. Let's just hope the carnage is not as bad as it seems likely to be. What are these idiots thinking? Oh wait, they're not. And thanks to everyone for your patience yesterday. If you didn't see the debacle with the YouTube bug, never mind, we are back to business as usual. But for everyone who experienced a slight disruption, thanks for sticking with me. And lastly, don't forget you can join Patreon. You really are missing out. I dropped another video exclusive to Patreon today before this one. That's right, Patreon getting priority. What are you going to do? Truly horrifying event. And I mean horrifying, the kind of stuff that I've been losing sleep about and will now be having serious nightmares about. Wake up, ladies and gentlemen. If you're not already a member on Patreon, click the card in the corner or the link in the pinned comment to join. That is, of course, if you're ready. Maybe it's better to just stay safe and ignorant. I'm Stephen Mark Ryan. This is Solving the Money Problem, and I love you all.
That's the whole point. It's a low base, 13 times.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you want to support the channel and instantly unlock over 100 exclusive videos, plus my 10-year Tesla stock price targets and loads of other perks, including optional access to my Tesla valuation model, join our growing community of thousands of supporters on Patreon with the link in the pinned comment. You can also pick up some Tesla, Elon, and investment themed merch in the merch store. And if you're still watching, you're awesome. Please let me know your thoughts on today's video in the comments below and click the card on screen now to watch the next video.